But this time I went out and it was orange and it was golden and it was a cloud first. It was what I saw at first. It was a gold cloud. It had scalloped edges and there were people behind it. So there were shadows of people. And I'm pretty sure I saw my brother's shadows who went up there a few years ago. And I'm like, where am I? Then I saw, oh, there's people. And I'm kind of an extrovert. So I'm like, I'm going to go say hi. I'm going to go greet them, right? This is cool wherever I'm at, right? Hadn't really dawned on me yet, I don't think. But I tried to step forward and I could not step forward. In the meantime, I started to feel a presence next to me. So you know how like you're in the airport, somebody starts pacing you on the side and you're like, who is that? That's what it just felt like, just like that, like I was on earth. And I thought, wait a minute. And he was there. Jesus was there. And he told me it wasn't time yet. And he took down these two, I called them gates, but they were like panels. They were jeweled panels and they had onyx and pearl and they had, and they were kaleidoscope. So they would come down and they met in the middle and they blocked me to go to that gold. I couldn't go to that gold cloud. It blocked me.
Today's conversation is different. This isn't just a debate. It's not a theology lecture. It's the story of a moment that changed how one woman sees life, time, and purpose. My guest today is Julie Bonn Blank. And Julie, I want to say thank you for trusting us with sharing your amazing story. And I've been looking forward to having you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. I am so glad to be here. And you never know when it could go into a debate. Just a heads up, on that.
Hey, that's okay. That's okay. I have no problem debating about anything related to NDEs or heaven. I've been playing in this space for getting close to a decade now, so I have opinions. I'm not wearing my hoodie today, but I do have a hoodie that says all my friends went to heaven and all I got was this stupid hoodie.
I love it.
So
I love it.
It is strange when, like myself and John Burke, there are a few of us who play in this space who are non-experiencers. And so, we get to be part of lots of conversations, but we're not the expert that you are. But in terms of your story, I always like to paint a backdrop just so people get a sense of who you are before your experience. And so before we get into what happened, I want people to understand like who you were, what was life like before your near-death experience. So before that day, how would you have described like your faith, day in the life? Like what was the normal Julie prior to your near-death experience?
Sure. The normal Julie was never in heaven. She was working in the space of advocacy for domestic violence and had been a previous survivor of domestic violence, so felt called to that. She was an author, and she also oversees Cascade Christian Writers as president of the organization. And she was working really hard to just continue what God had put her on. And what happened when she went to heaven is he confirmed that she was on the right track. And that was, an amazing, amazing thing. So I've suffered with allergies for a very long time. And, I've now been to heaven twice. The second time happened while I was writing the book, Routed to Heaven, and I didn't have an introduction for the book. Well, I had ideas, but I'm like, Lord, what do you want me to do as the introduction? And he took me one more time. And as I was waking up, he said, there's your introduction. And I was like, so I, went forward and did it. But allergies have been an issue for a long time. And increasingly over the last probably 6 years, Satan has really increased his attacks against not just me, but the ministries that I'm involved with. And there's been several. And I think he tried to take me out. He'd been doing everything but that. He'd been trying to disrupt, finances and the organizations and leadership issues and personnel issues and all these things in the place I work. And I'm like, God, God, protect us, because these are ministries, that are making an impact and a difference in people's lives. And Satan was like, well, I'm not trying hard enough. And so he gave me an allergic reaction that took me out. And God allowed it. My viewpoint has changed a little bit on that. I used to kind of say, Satan was trying and trying. He finally killed me off, but, he doesn't own my soul. So I got sent back. These days, I'm wondering if God was really walking alongside of that, saying, no, this is very intentional, that you're going to get a glimpse, of heaven and come back into these things. It's pretty astounding how it all came about. And God actually walked me through this allergic reaction, talking to me, telling me what to do with each component and each piece and when to call 911. It was like an hour and a half later that I actually was able to call 911, which was perfect timing. And so God knows, right? He sees the entire picture. But when it comes down to it, I can now look at Satan and say, I'm not yours. You've got nothing on me, because he truly doesn't. God said, she's not ready to go yet. She's got work to do.
And I'm curious, in my world now, and I think in your world, thinking about near death experiences in the afterlife is probably very normal and feels like it's just
Right.
a typical day in the life for you before your experience. Were you someone who expected to see supernatural encounters, or were you more of just kind of a normal plain Jane person who wasn't looking for angels in God to show up on the daily?
I have been involved somewhat in the supernatural, but was not as involved as I am now. And an example of that is 25 years ago, I wrote a book of true angel stories because I had had some, in my life that had shown up. It's always fascinated me. What I didn't do was take it personally. This is kind of the funny part because 5 years ago, God led my husband and I to a new church. And it ended up being an Assemblies of God church. And he's a Mennonite background, Baptist Protestant background. We're both pretty conservative and we're like, why are we here? But we love the church. And then I went to heaven and then I came back and then God has healed me physically and he's been having me pray over other people and doing amazing things. And I'm like, now I get it. He sent me to an Assemblies of God church. So I would say, yes, I dabbled in it and I certainly was aware of it and I believed in it. And I know that God heals. I, I've nowhere experienced it in my life as personally as I did when I went to heaven, and came back and when he walked me all through that. So we are super close at this point. He has instilled the gift of tongues in me, which growing up, that would have seemed crazy to my Baptist background, but he has. He walked me through a deliverance I needed to do, to get there. And those prayers have power. I asked him why when that occurred. And he said, because you're obedient. And he said, prayers in heavenly language, he said, go directly to the throne room. And I was like, all right, Jesus, I'm on board. Here I am. Here I am. Send me. So yeah, it has always played a role, but certainly not as deep as it did, since August 2024.
That almost sounds like a bad joke, a Mennonite and a Baptist walk into an AG church
Yeah. Yep.
kind of a thing. And I can totally relate to that as a guy who grew up in very conservative church circles to be thrust into the charismatic world, as I always have said, because God has a sense of humor. I was like, wow, I'm not in Kansas anymore. Here we go. And now this is my normal place. And I've seen a lot of things over the past decade, but I'm sure I was just as out of sorts and uncomfortable as you guys would have been walking into an AG space being like, wow, this is not how we grew up. Definitely
Exactly.
different.
Yeah.
I mean, so if you didn't have a charismatic background or the supernatural was not normalized in your upbringing, if or when you heard, say, people sharing near-death experience stories or fantastical angel encounters, were you skeptical of things like that? Were you open to them? How did you feel about these sorts of things before you had your own encounters?
Yeah, that's a good question. You always want to be open and believe, right? But then you have the way you were raised and you have all these components that, play, a part in it. And I'll be honest, and my parents know this, I'm not ratting on them, but when I was younger, I had asked my parents about healings and about those things and they pretty much stuck to, those people aren't of God. And I'd be like, well, can't God heal? And they're like, yes, but he doesn't do it that way. And I was like, huh, I recently reminded them of this conversation. And so I had the very conservative, background growing up. But there was something in me, God has worked in my life in miraculous ways and he has healed me and he has seen me through some very, very tough times. And he saw me through a first marriage with a husband that was very addicted to opiates. And he saw me through so many things. And so I knew the miraculous was there. He did that for me, in those ways. And he does it with the ladies I work with in domestic violence, as an advocate now. And now I'm running my own advanced abuse recovery program called Broken Souls Restored. And I have seen so many come in, where I was at and be completely restored. And that is a work of God. That absolutely is, a miracle. And sometimes when you're leading these types of groups, you go into deep prayer. We would often go into deep prayer. He shows up. He showed up in a room. He showed up in a room when I was with a group and I was deeply praying. There was two women in there that were deeply distressed over that week's happenings and things that were going on. And when we go into prayer, we just go so deep. And I happened to look up during prayer and there he was behind them. He was standing behind them and his features were unclear. The white robe was very clear, but both his hands were clear. And he had one hand on each of those gals' shoulders. He was behind them. And it was truly wonderful to be able to wrap up and, of course, get a bit emotional about it because anytime he shows up, I do. But it was truly amazing to be able to tell them, God has his hand on you. Literally, Jesus was standing here and he has his hand on you and you're healing. So he does care that much. And I do believe that supernatural is increasing. I do believe that we're in the last season of days and that he is doing it for the purpose of witness and testimony. And right now, we're seeing a lot of kids who go to heaven and come back. And I think that's intentional too, because they are not afraid to speak. You notice that on their interviews, they come back and they're like, da, la, 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 they go on and on and on because there's no fears there as far as what they can see. And they tell it like it is. And I think that's intentional on his behalf. Sure.
And in terms of being able to see in the spirit, I mean, you just described being in a prayer meeting, seeing Jesus behind the people you're praying with. Is that something that developed or heightened on the other side of your near death experience? Because there are a lot of folks I've talked to who didn't operate in any spiritual gifts prior to their NDE. And they're like, it's kind of like I have a foot across the other side of the veil because angels, they can see demons, they can see Jesus. So
Yes.
is that something after your NDE that came about?
Yes. So I have always had what you would call words, words of knowledge. And I've used that, in my work and in my prayer. But it is tenfold what it was. And there's times that somebody might be walking by and I know that they've been divorced twice. I know that they're hurting. I know they just lost their kid, whatever the case might be. And I take that to mean that God's telling me, go pray, go pray with that person, and I do. So that has increased. Definitely, the sense of him being nearby has increased. Never before in my life had I felt his presence. But when I came back, it's like he wraps me. I mean, he wraps me in warmth. And when I'm in deep prayer or otherwise, it's a pressing down that I had never, felt before, which I suppose those in the charismatic, who are raised that way probably have felt that way. So yeah, I would say I'm 10 times more, sensitive to it. And he's bringing up more cases. Those spiritual gift assessment tests? I always took them through my life and they were always the same. They were 50% leadership, 50% mercy, which I'm like, okay, every leader needs mercy. So that's perfect. Now when I take them, I've got, it's even across. It's teaching, it's prophecy. It's, all these things that have now come up since my experience of going to heaven. And so maybe that was also one of the purposes, right? To enhance the gifts that we need to use here in ministry for him.
Yeah, that is, I mean, the assessment part isn't fairly common. I always think of our mutual acquaintance, Randy Kay. And I mean, in his story, he talks about how as an executive trainer and coach, he would always have people do all these batteries of tests to find out, these are your skills and here's your personality traits and all these things. And, following his NDE, Randy ranks in a completely different quadrant in terms of love and empathy, and it was a test he'd taken how many times over the course of, all those years of training and leading sessions. And so I always love stories like Randy's and yours where somebody said, well, hey, I took this test and I ended up in a different quadrant. That's just so crazy because I always, is it scientific proof? Not exactly, but I think it does lend itself to show how much people's personalities and their bents and their interests all shift on the other side of a near-death experience. Let's transition now and kind of get into that day that you had this near-death experience. You've mentioned briefly that you've had a lot of challenges with allergies. So take us to that day. Like what were the kind of the signs that something was not right or something bad was happening? Like walk us into that part of your story.
Sure. So my allergies were bad enough that I've been seeing an allergist who then prescribed a shot for me that's supposed to prevent allergies. And apparently I reacted to it, but I had 6 shots. I had been going for 6 weeks in a row. And that was on a Thursday that I had my 6th one. And my 5th shot, I had started to feel funny afterwards. And I kind of thought, but how your imagination goes. And I'm like, I'm sure I'm fine. But I went ahead and got the 6th one anyway. And then it was a Saturday, the Saturday after that shot. My husband was out of the house. He was at a work event, of course. And I got really sick. And God first told me, I heard his voice. He said, treat this as an allergic reaction. And I'm so stubborn. Oh my God, I'm so stubborn. I argued with him a little in my head. I'm like, this is not like any reaction I have ever had. Are you sure? And he said again, treat this like an allergic reaction. And I was passing out and trying not to pass out. Every time I laid on the couch, I heard in my head, do not go to sleep. So I would get up and I turned on the TV. I'm trying to distract myself. There was a lot of things going on and it didn't feel like a reaction to me. But he told me that again. So I went and I took all my oral medications that I keep just in case, and they didn't really work. And then he got loud. He got insistent. I was laying on the couch and he said, Julie, my name. He said, treat this as an allergic reaction. And I said, oh, you mean my EpiPen? Oh, that stupid thing I have been carrying now for a couple years, just in case. Went and got my EpiPen and did it. And it turns out it was expired. So it did work for, a few minutes, but not long. And then I got to the point where I finally was able to dial 911 because my whole body was trembling. So I was trying to text my husband and my daughter and my mom, and it was not working. Trying to call 911, not working. Finally, got through and they got me into the ambulance, and I finally felt safe. This is going to sound weird, but felt safe to pass out because I didn't hear any, don't pass out, don't go to sleep. And so they were trying to keep me awake. And they do that, of course, by, asking questions. Where do you live? Who's the president? All these things, and I'm like trying to answer, and my throat was like filled with cotton. Really hard to explain, but it felt like complete cotton. And I could hardly form a word. I was mumbling. They gave me steroids immediately. They gave me a ton of Benadryl immediately. And they were going to give me more epi, but they weren't sure on that yet. And so we were talking, and then they asked me a question trying to keep me awake. The driver came back. He's like, hey, saw me going out again. He said, what do you do? What do you do for a living? And I was like, I'm an author and I oversee Cascade Christian Writers and I work with domestic violence victims. And then my head went to the side and I was out. But there was a difference this time. Every time I had gone out before, it was that true fade to black and then nothing, which is hard to understand unless you've been there, but it's true. But this time I went out and it was orange and it was golden, and it was a cloud first. It was what I saw at first. It was a gold cloud. It had scalloped edges and there were people behind it. So there were shadows of people. And I'm pretty sure I saw my brother's shadows who went up there a few years ago. And I'm like, where am I? Then I saw, oh, there's people, and I'm kind of an extrovert. So I'm like, I'm going to go say hi. I'm going to go greet them. Right. This is cool wherever I'm at. Right. Hadn't really dawned on me yet, I don't think. But I tried to step forward and I could not step forward. In the meantime, I started to feel a presence next to me. So you know how like you're in the airport, somebody starts pacing you on the side and you're like, who is that? That's what it just felt like, just like that, like I was on earth. And I thought, wait a minute. And he was there. Jesus was there. And he told me it wasn't time yet. And he took down these two, I called them gates, but they were like panels. They were jeweled panels and they had onyx and pearl and they had, and they were kaleidoscope. So they would come down and they met in the middle and they blocked me to go to that gold. I couldn't go to that gold cloud. It blocked me. And they were alive. They were dancing. And they were like, it was like a performance. And I kept seeing things move, like make a flower, or I'd see this picture here. I still have my earthly memories because it reminded me of the mosaic glass that my dad likes to put together. And I was thinking flowers, what kind of flowers are these going to be? Which I recognized, none of them, but they were dancing. And then when I felt his presence, I realized, it was Jesus and they're dancing for him, not necessarily for me, but for him. And so I just finished this conversation in the ambulance about what work I do. And then he told me, he said, there's still so much work, not just for me, so much work to be done. And he carried me back. I did not tunnel up, and I am claustrophobic. So that makes sense to me because as I write now and I report on heavenblog.org, I talk to a lot of people who've had experiences, and it does seem that he caters our experience. I mean, he loves us enough that he knows us that deeply that he caters our experience. So pulling back from heaven felt like one of those movies, like when it's close on the earth and it's like, shoom, really fast. It was super fast. I opened my eyes in the ambulance and he was still talking. As I opened my eyes in the ambulance, I could still hear him and he squeezed my hand. But I looked over there and there was nobody there. It was just the, ambulance panel, but he was there with me and he had carried me back. And that was the first experience. And I did learn as I was writing this most recent book that there was more, that we walked and we talked, and there was two issues in particular I struggled with more than that as I wrote the book, because it's really a call for your heaven-minded mission manifesto. And he told me both times, he's like, do you remember in heaven that I did this? And I was like, wow, and it was just an amazing, amazing experience. So I remembered other things later on. The grass I remembered later on and feeling it and how soft it was. When I was up there, I didn't hear praise and song and angels and worship. I heard stark silence. It's pretty much like the best noise canceling headphones you could ever. That's how quiet it was. I was like, felt, enveloped in cotton and therefore very safe. But, you look at my background, that also makes sense that he enclosed me in, to make me safe. So we've had more conversation. And I remember that. I remember those occasionally. I try to jot them down when I can. And again, that was just the first time, I was writing the book. He took me up again to give me that introduction. And I was grateful because I actually got to see him this time. And we met in a meadow. There was a big tree, and it was an incredible experience of being outfitted for, my job here on earth. And part of what it told me was that it made me feel good because I felt like, okay, I'm on the right track on earth, right? But we are on the right track. Any dreams he gives us, any experiences he gives us are all part of that mission that we're supposed to be completing here on earth for him. And he is the dream giver. A lot of us were raised with, oh, that's just a dream. You could never be a musician. That's just a dream. But God has planted those dreams in us, as part of our mission. It really spoke to me how intimately he knew me, how he knew of my work in domestic violence. He knew I was an author. He knew I had books out. He knew all of this about me, loved me, supported me, and said, you're doing the right thing. Go back and do more of it because there's more for you and everybody else to do as well. He's not come back because he's not ready. He's not come back because we're not ready. There's still work to be done.
Well, and so it sounds like, unlike a lot of NDEs, you didn't have the typical light tunnel experience. Like, you immediately transitioned, we might say, across the veil
Yeah.
to the other side. And it sounds like you didn't have a welcoming committee per se, but you at least thought you recognized a shadow, or who you perceived or understood to be your brother, which is interesting to me. In terms of like Jesus' attention, like did it feel like he was solely focused on you? Like you were the most important, only existing person in the world? Like, and especially for somebody that comes out of your background, like how healing was that for you to know that you were that important and Jesus loves you that much?
Yeah, we all have leftovers from our abuse, is what I call them. And even though I've been out for many years, I did still struggle with anxiety that he has completely healed for me when I was there with him. And that was very healing. I could have walked and talked all day, and maybe we did, because time is so different. They were just getting to the paddles when I got back into the ambulance. So it wasn't that long, but, we walked and talked and had all that happen. And I do feel like, although he's the COO of heaven, that he probably had a list of a million things to do, and yet it didn't matter. He wasn't telling me to go home because he was busy. He was telling me to go home because I had work. I had work to do. And so it very much feels that way. And I wish I could carry that back down to earth and explain that more to people, that when you are there with him, you are his one and only. He looks in your eyes like you are the most precious thing in the world. He's not thinking of all these other people he needs to tour around heaven or greet or do whatever. You are valuable. And when I think of it that way, and I realize that every person on earth is that way, no wonder he cares so much. He can't wait for the day that we are all gathered in heaven as all of his children, which, I'm a mom and I'm a nana now too. So that makes a lot of sense to me, right? Those are my best days, when everybody gathers together and we actually see each other. But when you do not, you leave a hole in the family of God when you're not following what he wants you to do, or you're running your own way or running your own path, because there's a role that only you can fill. And he knows that, and you know that. And when he's looking at you up there and you're looking at him, all of that all of that communicates between the two of you, and who made you, and that it was not for fluff. It was for an incredible purpose. And what are you doing, to live up to that purpose and to do what he wants you to do? All that is communicated, as well as his deep love. And you're my one and only. I've never liked my name. Julie's a very common name. I grew up with 5 Julies in every class. Got to a point where they'd call us by our last names and be like, okay, because none of us would answer, right? But when he said my name, I love my name. My name is now my favorite thing, because I'm not, and I said that to him for a long time. When he's calling me to do all these things in this prayer ministry, I'm like, I'm just Julie. And he stopped me cold one day when I said, I'm just Julie. And he said, you're my Julie. And I was like, I'll never complain about my name again. It's a beautiful name when it comes from his lips. And he feels that way about you too, not just me. Yeah. Pretty amazing.
And when you were in heaven, did you feel like you were at home and this is where you've always belonged? Because in my experience, people often will say they felt more at home in heaven than they ever felt down here on earth.
Absolutely. It's hard to explain how it is ingrained in you, but I assure you it is ingrained in you. You were created to live in eternity with him. This earth is just a stopping point. So it's the most intimate, the intimate closure that you could ever think of when you are there. And there are parts of heaven that have been crafted just for you. I mean, and it's not just, you're not just going to have a mansion on the hill. The Bible talks about that a little bit, but does he tell you this, that he crafts each one of them for, based on your desires and your likes and your loves, and yours may not be a mansion. It might be a cabin by the sea, which is probably going to be more like mine. I didn't get to see mine, but that everything within that home has also been crafted would care for you and knowing you. I mean, you are that important to him. And believe me, if we didn't have missions, he would have called our number, right? We would be up there. We would be up there now. So I felt very much at home. I was thinking that goofy earth, that's a goofy earth. What was I ever even doing there? You just keep me up here. And of course, we who go mourn for that. I did at least. And I know other people have as well, because there's a deep seated feeling that this is my one and only true forever home. And why can't I be here, now? And I missed him, I missed him and I missed heaven. When I came back, and I still do some days, that can be, a little bit of a struggle, but my work's here not done. But yeah, it is your forever home, and it will fit better than any shoe ever did. In fact, the chairs do that too. When you're in heaven, you sit in a chair, they mold around you so that they're super comfortable. It's really cool because it was made for you.
And I always love to focus on reentry, so to speak, in an interview.
Mhm.
I think of, um, goodness, her name's escaping me. Goodness, it's one of Julie's and my close friends. She died in a horse riding accident when she was
Heidi.
16. Heidi
Heidi
Barr.
Bar.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Thank you.
Sure.
But like her reentry is very traumatic, and
Yes.
she gets kind of shoved back into her body, almost feeling like her soul does not fit, and Jesus has to smooth her out. What you described sounded a lot less traumatic. Sounds like Jesus was with you as you transitioned back. Like for you, when you came back into your body, you didn't have kind of the tunnel experience in reverse. It sounds like you woke up, you came to. Like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, it's hard to explain what it feels like waking up from being dead. But my heart did stop. So, our friend Randy actually tells me that technically it was an afterlife experience, not near death, but near death is a term that everybody, knows. So, yes, my transition was easy, especially going. I closed my eyes and I was there. And I came back and I felt like I had been in a very deep sleep, but not quite, but because it was just weird. I felt like it was surreal. I felt like, what is real? Because I was just somewhere else, And I later told them a couple days later, my primary doctor had called to check on me, and we were talking about what happened. And I said, I saw Jesus, said I went to heaven. And I said, my heart, I said, did I flatline? And she goes, yes, it's in your records that you did flatline. And I knew that. I'd already known that. But, to get medical confirmation was, I do have a friend named Ruth Ellen, and I talked to her at the Heaven conference I was at with Randy's conference. And she has a little bit in my book because when she came back, forces were fighting her going back in her body. And Jesus actually had to tell the evil forces, she's mine, she's not yours. And it was very difficult. I mean, she even woke up ill, and throwing up. And once she got back, but it was a very difficult and painful to go back into her body. And I've heard some, similar stories as well. And I don't know if that Satan gave up on me. He's like, well, obviously she's still meant to be there. So I'm not going to give her a hard time, but trust me, if he can give you a hard time, he will. And so some transitions back are much harder than other people's for sure. And I'm grateful. I didn't see hell. I'm grateful. I didn't have any of the bad things and the PTSD that comes from that. I'm grateful that there wasn't any pain, but I've had enough pain in my life. Maybe that was just the Lord saying, we're going to make this smooth and easy, but I'm still getting you there, very possibly.
Well, and I really connect with what you said earlier about God sort of tailoring the experience to the person who's having the encounter. I think again, Heidi is a great one of, surfing with Jesus and spending time in the Father's lap. It seems so often, whether it's how we encounter, the Father, Son, or Holy Spirit, or how, I think of Jim Woodford smelling his grandmother's tapioca pudding,
Yep.
or Randy smelling his grandmother's chocolate chip cookies,
Right.
or Randy encountering his beloved puppy, Jim seeing horses, like whatever it might be. It seems like God gives people what they need to be not really comfortable, but I almost think comforted as they're trying to take in this hard to process whole experience of leaving their earthbound body and being, solely in their spirit body
Yes.
on the other side of the veil. In terms of how you shifted, and I think this is an important part of the book that you have coming up, is just you focus on, the transformation that comes on the other side of a near-death experience, and also what that means for those of us who encounter stories like Randy's and yours and others on how we should live life. Like for you, like what were some of the things that changed? Like you said you took a leadership kind of test or whatever, and you place different than you did in the past. But in terms of how you see time, what you think's important, like what are the things that shifted? Because some people who have NDEs, they end up getting divorced, they end up quitting their job, they do all kinds of crazy stuff because they're no longer compatible with their old life because they're so dramatically changed. So for
Right.
you, like, what were some of the changes you had to work through?
It was dramatic. It is dramatic. I also heard those divorce stats and I mentioned them to my husband and he's like, I don't understand. And I'm very fortunate that he's flexible and he loves me, so much. And plus we had a faith base already. We love the Lord. I could see somebody going up and having an experience that did not love the Lord or did not have that kind of environment that it would be much more, much more difficult. And I don't think God means to make it more difficult for us, but it comes down to the fact that he knows the desires of our heart. My dog died a couple years ago. She got me through holy heck on this earth. She really did. And I didn't get to see her, but he has told me that she's waiting on my porch, on my home up there, which is, pretty awesome. And as far as changes, it's hard to describe. Truly, it's kind of like describing things in heaven here on earth. There's just no language, right? For the colors and for the things, it's so magnificent that you can't, even we writers can't put it in, to words. My whole life changed. For a long time, I felt like I had one foot in heaven and one foot on earth. I could not fully focus here. I couldn't. People were like, Julie, are you there? And I'm like, every time they look around, I'm like thinking about building a treehouse to the sky because that's what I really wanted to do, to be closer to him because I missed him. It changed. It did not change my work, but it did change my work, as in God took me out of the place where I was at and had me build this advanced recovery program and now starting a nonprofit, which I'm in my 50s. I'm not my 30s. I had no desire to go out and start a new business, but here we go. Here I am. Here I am. Lord, send me. Personality change. There's been some of that. There's been some people that have mentioned that. We haven't gotten into great detail, on that. Obviously, God gave me my base personality, but I think he's enhanced things like the people skills, and certainly I had always had compassion for people, but now I'm like, don't want to drive by a homeless person without getting them a meal, or something. I think, God has a way of doing that because he's pulled us so close to him that we are emulating what he's giving, what he's looked in our eyes with. We're emulating that. So I see people differently. And I guess that probably the words of knowledge thing helps with that because although I had that before, it was periodic. And now it's much more frequent. I know more about people. I know when they've had trauma. There's been times I've been able to pray with people through their trauma and heal them of their trauma, which is just beautiful. That's an amazing thing. So all those things have changed. I'm certainly more open-minded. I won't say I beg to go back there, but I'm not afraid of dying anymore. I used to be, and I wasn't afraid of where I was going. I was afraid of the process. But literally, my friends, it's just literally I just close my eyes and open them there. There's nothing to fear. He's got us. He's got you. So that has changed. Grown children, I think, probably think I'm a little batty because my whole life now is an eternal perspective, getting as many people to heaven as can go, getting as many people hope and healing from their trauma and from anything else going on, so that they can also be effective, guiding ladies up, not just to heal, but to actually restore their years from abuse and then leading them into ministries where they are now. I mean, I just had my group this morning and I almost just cried because there's like 3 of them that gave, prayer requests because they're working with somebody, a gal who's been affected by domestic abuse and they wanted prayer for it. And I'm just like, I'm like a proud mother. And this is what I'm doing for the Lord, and for them. And I'm doing it because people did it for me. So all of that has been extremely enhanced as well. He has given me the gift of tongues. He used a couple downtown Portland to activate that in me. They told me, you have it. They said it just needs activated, but they did that for me. And they also prayed healing and God honored that. And I had horrible physical ailments, including the allergies that have been healed. And now I am also, praying over other people. So it's like my whole focus is I always loved the Lord, always loved the Lord. Now I can't think of anything in the perspective of us being on earth. And even the verse in Romans, all things work out together for good. I don't see it that way anymore because I believe that, but he's not talking about our greater good on earth. He's talking about the good of everybody eternally, in heaven and whatever that takes, to get there. When I read verses, when I look at hymns, when I sing songs, perspectives jump out. When I first got back and I would read the Bible, I'd be like, oh yeah, he's been there. Oh yeah, oh yeah, she's been to, oh yeah, she had a vision. And I could just tell from, the writings, which people hung out closer to heaven than the rest of us, because once you're there, you do see all that. So it was a major change in every single area of my life. but I'm grateful. And I'm so grateful for the experience that he gave me and the fact that he carried me and he pulls me close and he holds me. And I'm so grateful for every single way he shows me his presence every day. Just if I can't be there with him, at least, that's what the Holy Spirit's for, right? To hang out with us here on earth and to help us with those things and wisdom and discernment and comfort. Yeah.
That's why Jesus sent the helper, because he couldn't be directly with us after he
Exactly.
ascended
Right.
to
He knew we
heaven.
needed somebody.
Well, and, I'm gonna pull on the pets in heaven thread just for a moment.
Okay.
I mean, I'm a pet owner, but I'm kind of hit and miss whether or not I care if my pets are in heaven with me. It seems like dogs are primary. Like everybody talks about encountering their dogs in heaven. I have a third party account of somebody encountering a cat in heaven, but
Okay.
their beloved cat. But I think through all the interviews I've done through the years and Randy has done, I don't see a lot of cats in heaven. So I don't have a definitive answer, but the dogs seem to win like 99 out of the 100 times I've heard about pets in heaven. I'm just curious for you. I mean, clearly how you described it, that was very significant. Like for you to find out your dog's going to be in heaven. Like I'd love for you to just express for somebody like me, who I guess is a little shallow with my pets and how much I love them. Like, why is that important to you? Why is that comforting to you?
Well, my mocha got me through some pretty hard years, here on earth and took care of me too, and defended me. So there's all those reasons, wrapped up to furry goodness. And we had cats too at times. So it's not like I don't love cats. It's just that call me one or the other. I'm definitely a dog person. But like you, I've only heard one cat account. I've heard horse accounts. I've heard dog accounts. And then I recently interviewed somebody who saw, they were obviously pets, but they were not nameable. They looked different, but they were walking alongside people. People were petting them, but there's no name for them, on earth. So I'll just go back to the fact that God knows the desires of your heart. You know what? And if you're not so much of a pet person, that's okay. Sean, he's going to have, for you, whatever it is the desire of your heart and comforts, has brought you comfort on earth because he knows all that. That's important to him as well.
Yeah, we won't try to get into the discussion on, well, do our pets have souls and what does that mean? I can only speak from the experiences of others that I've met a lot of people who have encountered their dogs during their near death experience. I don't know why. Again, horses seem to come up often as well. Yeah, so far, cats are slowly inching their way in my world and your world. It's just a very very small part of those stories. I find a lot with these heaven encounters, people will fixate, what color were Jesus's eyes
Yeah.
or what did his robe look like or this or that. And they'll get stuck on some things. For you, big picture, when you talk about your near death experience and then your additional heaven encounter that, ended up going in one of your books, like when people hear your story, hear your journey, like what's the takeaway that you want them to have? I mean, it's wonderful that people want to know all these varying details, but that's like missing the forest for the trees when we have a testimony like yours.
That's interesting you say it that way because I would say that the more we hear about heaven, the more hope we have and the more excited we become. Now, should it be that way? Of course not, right? But we are humans and I think that adds to the component of it. I think my next book about heaven probably needs to be about value and self-worth. That's what God's been telling me. And he's already kind of given me, an outline of it. And the reason for that is because of what I learned in heaven. I didn't have greatest self-esteem, as a teenager. And I made some decisions in my 20s that I just look back on like, what was I thinking? And God knows all that. And he also records all that. I mean, we do have recordings in heaven. Think about that the next time you want to do something you're not thinking is quite right. And it might deter you. But the main message that came across to me was his deep, incredible, intimate love, for us that that verse that says he knit us together in our mother's womb isn't just he made a body happen. It's like he placed every strand of DNA how it was supposed to be. He gave you every characteristic, every talent, every gift, every dream for you to be exactly one of a kind and exactly how you are. And there is nobody else like you. And so I am his only Julie when he looks at me, right? Because that's how he looks at me. And I am just convinced that if people could see that adoration in his eyes that he does show you, that our bad days here would be like nothing. Our depression and our anxiety and our mental health struggles, we all have that. And of course, a lot of us have had trauma, but that is completely taken away when you look in his eyes and realize his deep, deep love and incredible love for us. I don't deserve that. I don't know about any of you. Know how many times I've sprinted off, out of the pen, the sheep on the cliff. He comes and gets me. You don't really want me, do you? And he's like, absolutely. I do. And that he feels that. And I just wish that I could bottle that. I wish I could bottle that from heaven and bring it to earth and help people realize that they are not an accident here walking on earth, no matter what's gone on, no matter what trauma, no matter what healing they need, no matter what they've been through, no matter, what they feel, what they think they see. No, you are carefully crafted for a purpose, for his purpose, for his purpose. And if you rest in that, that is enough. That is enough. Yeah.
And Julie, for those who'd like to connect with you, find out about your books, all the things you have going on, where are some of the places we can discover you on the web?
I love to hang out on the web. The Heaven blog is on Substack, and you can just go to heavenblog.org to read that and all the things that God is teaching me since, as well as other people's accounts and memories He's giving me. And then my main website is at juliebonnblank.com. My new book, Routed to Heaven, comes out in February. It has a lot of accounts, not just mine, but also some reflections, and there'll be a study guide as well for small groups and individuals.
Well, and Julie gave me the opportunity to preview her book. And if you like some of the earlier books that Randy and I did together, where we shared accounts of heaven and hell stories and we had kind of commentary and shared our insights on those stories, Julie is doing something similar in this book. So I think if you like those books that Randy and I did the last few years, you will really appreciate this book as well. Julie, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been a blessing to spend time with you and to get to know you. Thank you for blessing us with your heaven experience today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate you as well.